again, I just don't think we had the technology at that time frame. I don't think we still have the technology unless we're getting help. Now, if we're getting help and they're showing us how to re-engineer or back engineer or design it, then I can buy it. But I just don't think we have the technology. But I do think one thing is really, really strange, and I've brought this up numerous times on my show. Being electronic nut since I was a kid, I was like a CBer when I was 10, 11 years old. I got my amateur ticket at 12. Besides being in broadcasting, I also, worked on transmitters and radio stations as an engineer. I was hired to do both on some radio stations. When the transmitter would need work, I would be in there fixing it. I have a good background in electronics. I used to also in the 80s design computer components. So I'm not an idiot when it comes to electronic. But here's the thing. We go back from when tubes were invented. How many years span did radios have tubes? A long time. Computers, when they started coming out in the 50s, were not really a computer as we know it. They were really not capable of other than adding numbers up pretty much. And then all of a sudden, we went through the tube stage, the transistor was invented. And then shortly after the transistor was invented, integrated circuits. That's where you take a one circuit and you add like hundreds of maybe transistors in this little teeny micro circuit, and it kept getting smaller and smaller down to a size where you have to use a microscope to see a circuit on some of this stuff now. The technology has really advanced. Fiber optics all of a sudden happened. And, my father, again, being an electronic engineer and designing electronic stuff for aircraft, said, this is really strange. Nowhere else in time have we advanced so far electronic-wise that he felt that we have had help. There's no way we could have gone from the tube stage to integrated circuit stage as fast as we did.
Well, there is a book about Bell Labs, and I was reading that book. I was curious about the development of technology myself. And in that book, they described how in the laboratories with these scientists working on these projects, they keep notebooks. And as they progress in their work, they write down step by step everything that's done. And if they have to go back and change something or go back and start all over, they have to draw lines through it. And my understanding from reading that book is that Bell Labs was very strict about documenting every step that was taken in the development of the technology. Now, my understanding is that the development of the transistor is thoroughly documented.
That I know.
But you do have people like Corso, Colonel Corso, claiming that we had help from the aliens in developing transistors and in the fiber optics and miniaturization and all that. And when we look at the progression of the technology, it is truly amazing. However, on the other hand, we haven't really had any progress in our basic propulsion, that is the internal combustion engine. We're still using it today, and that's been around over 100 years. And same thing with jet engines. I mean, we make them better. The internal combustion engine is made better. It's made more efficient, but we're still using the same technology, and that's been going on a long time. And that tends, in my mind, to kind of contradict the idea that the aliens are progressing all of our technology.
Well, they could also maybe curtailing. They don't want us to advance to a certain level. Maybe they slowed our advancement down. It seems like we advanced in laser. Laser has really gotten scary. I remember my dad when, back in the 60s, working with laser in his workshop. And he was so excited that, 5 feet away from the main laser light, it would, burn a hole through a piece of paper. And then he got it to a point where it burned a hole through a piece of cardboard and then a piece of aluminum. All in the 60s. Of course, that was it took a while to do it. It just didn't do it instantly. But, I mean, technology was just moving really kind of strange. Again, now you have these other group of people who say, well, you know what? We have a secret space force, and that's why we just now created one to kind of cover up the one we have. And again, I don't know. It's really confusing because, as you know, for every bit of, well, I think real information out there, there's 10 pieces of disinformation, which really gets you to pull out my hair, which little I have at my age.
Me too. Well, and I think that we've always had a secret space program, but not like some of these people have been claiming. There have always been classified military satellites and classified satellites and other military hardware going up into orbit. Now, we're living in a world where we have two perceived principal adversaries, Russia and China. And at least the Chinese are progressing in technology very rapidly as well, some of it being stolen from the United States, of course, and from other countries through industrial espionage. And so as our adversaries are active and effective in Earth orbit and in space, I think that you can make a case that we draw this distinction from terrestrial-based Air Force operations to space-based Air Force operations. And we have become, Gary, so dependent on satellites now that if our satellite systems go down, we're in trouble. I mean, our TV, our internet, our communications, it all runs out of our GPS.
Banking.
I've gotten so dumb that when I've moved to Washington, D.C. area, and I don't know the city well at all. If I have to go somewhere, I just put it in GPS and I let it tell me where to go. And I think a lot of people are depending on that now. When you think about how dependent we are on these satellites, I think you can make a very good case that we need a space force to protect our interests.
Oh, yeah, especially because, there is killer satellites out there. And a lot of people don't realize that they can bring another satellite right next to one of ours and hit it with a laser and destroy it. And or other device, and that is, it's something it could cause, a whole bunch of problems if you had a class of killer satellites out there taking out our communication satellites. It could really destroy our economy and our country, or any country, matter of fact, if it was being done to.
Yeah, but I think the thing that we have going for us is economic interdependence, and we're dependent on the Chinese and they're dependent on us. And maybe not as much with the Russians, but especially between the U.S. and China, there's a great deal of trade going on, and I don't think it's in the Chinese interests to disable our economy. But you never know, and someday there may be a situation where we need to have the systems in place to protect our assets in orbit. And I think that that's probably the rationale for creating this space force. And like I said, we already have a space force. There's U.S. Space Command and all that. But I think they're just segregating it more and making it what is really, in my mind, a subset of the Air Force.
Well, yeah, but again, too, I read it's actually under the Navy, if I remember right, because they have the budget.
Well, everything I've seen was the Air Force, but, I could be wrong. Maybe it's changing.
I have no idea. I can tell you this. I'm going back years and years ago when Ronald Reagan was president. My dad's closest friend, or one of his close friends, was a movie actor. He met while he was waiting to be discharged in Korea. And, I didn't know this guy. He'd come up and visit my dad every summer. I didn't know who he was. But one day I was watching a TV show called Maverick. And I go to my dad, "That's your friend?" He goes, "Yeah." So I started asking his friend the next time he came in, because I was always intrigued with Ronald Reagan. And I said, "Is there any way could you in any way get me to talk to Ronald Reagan?" He goes, "I don't know, but I am a good friend of his." Ronald Reagan had a national show where he'd call up, or young people could call up and ask the president a question. And it was like once a month. I didn't call him. He called me. I asked my question. A week later, I get a phone call from the White House. This is a real true story. And I talked to Ronald Reagan for a few minutes, and because of James Gardner and all that stuff. And I said to him, one of the things I said, what I'm worried about is in the newspapers, they're always talking about, doomsday, a war with Russia, nuke war, all this stuff. And I said, what's the Star Wars? Is that going to protect us against Russia? The Soviet Union actually at that time was used. And he kind of did his little thing, and he said, it'll protect us against them out there. And then he realized what he said, and he clammed up. And I didn't really think much of it for years and years and years went by. And then one day I was just thinking of our conversation, one of probably three I had with Ronald Reagan. And when he said out there, that doesn't mean the Soviet Union. He was talking about something else. So I think like Star Wars and stuff like that, we were back then trying to set up some type of protection, for our planet.
I've heard that. That has been a notion that has been passed around, and it's possible. I mean, anything's possible, and I think a lot of times that things are done by the government and they have more than one purpose. There's a public version of it, and then there's maybe a second or a third story behind the scenes to it, and it's certainly a distinct possibility.
I think so. I mean, I think things are going on. Well, anyway, we're going to be back with Tom Whitmore for at least another half an hour. We're going to go for break. James is going to be giving us the Earth news, paranormal news. So stay tuned. Tell your friends about Night Dreams Talk Radio. You can find our website at www.nightdreamstalkradio.com. James is on there. Ryan's on there. Ryan does our UFO reports on Thursdays. I'm going to try to get him on more than this Thursdays if I can't talk him into it. There's a lot of things I think we need to get out about UFOs and aliens and abductions and reports. And I think that's what we're trying to do on our show. Anyway, we'll be back in about 7.5 minutes. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio.
can advertise your business on Night Dreams Talk Radio, and you will be heard worldwide. Why not contact